Good afternoon, folks. This is John Rust on Rust on the Radio, Freedom 95, broadcasting at 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. In the studio today is J.W. Mikesell. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Justin George. Welcome.
Thank you. Great to be here. Appreciate it as always.
And Aidan Marietta.
Always great to be here.
So welcome, folks. I am your friend and farmer from Seymour, Indiana. Today we are talking about what on earth are our statewide elected officials doing with their time? These elected office holders who have important jobs of actually governing our state, for instance, looking at ways to cut costs. Look at our state. We have the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country. And now toll roads are coming our way for all of our interstates. And our elected officials spend their time running around the states, giving speeches about how wonderful they are, rather than doing their job. Thomas Jefferson had a quote on this, and this is, I think, really key. Thomas Jefferson said, "If serving in an elected office ever becomes a career, corruption will surely follow." That is just an absolute truth, and that's why I'm for, number one, term limits, and I am for always voting elected officials who are just running for re-election, vote for their opponent. We have to have new blood. Look at Indiana. We are fast becoming Taxachusetts. What are you paying for gas? In Massachusetts, gas is cheaper than Indiana right now. This is from taxfoundation.org, and it's a listing of gas tax rates by state, and an article by Adam Hoffer and Jacob Rosen. How high are gas taxes in your state? California, first in the nation, no surprise there, 68.1 cents per gallon. They're number one for the highest gas tax in the country. Illinois, our neighbor to the west, 66.5 cents per gallon. Number two. Well, we know who runs Illinois. That is, and California, purely Democratic administrations, lock, stock, and barrel.
That's true.
Pennsylvania, same thing, 58.7 cents per gallon. They're number three. Guess where Indiana is? We're number four. After those three big liberal Democratic states, guess who Indiana ties with for fourth? Washington State.
It's not a good state to be tied with.
Not a good state to tie.
Well, the Indiana gasoline tax is 52 cents a gallon. That's the same as Washington State. Massachusetts, who I used to call Taxachusetts back in the day, their gasoline tax is only 27 cents a gallon. Ultra-liberal Taxachusetts has a gas tax, listen to this, folks, one half the rate of Indiana. One half.
That's just wild.
We're Michigan's 48 cents, another heavily Democratic state. They're much cheaper gas than Indiana. Our neighbors to the south, Kentucky, they have a gasoline tax of 30 cents per gallon. They're 24th in the nation. Indiana ties for number four.
And I would just point out Kentucky's a red state, but it has a Democrat governor at the moment.
And Ohio, another rhino-led state, 38 cents a gallon, much cheaper than
I was
Indiana.
in Ohio last month, and it was way cheaper.
Just like Kentucky.
Well, and it's not just the gasoline tax. Indiana snuck into the quote-unquote property tax reform bill, which was really not much of a tax reform bill at all. Anyhow, that law gave authority to the governor to tax every mile of Indiana interstates with tolls. So now Governor Braun is authorized to toll every square mile of Indiana state interstate highways.
And what's that going to do with local roads? People are going to use those, and it's going to be a lot of bad traffic.
It's going to be disgusting, absolutely disgusting.
Well, and these tolls, they're not going to go away. They're going to be in, and unless we get real conservatives elected in the state of Indiana, we are only going to see more and more toll roads. We're only going to see higher and higher gasoline taxes. Unfortunately, Indiana is a red state, but our politicians are not red. They're more blue. We're tied with Washington State for gasoline tax. That says everything.
We need to look more like Florida under Ron DeSantis instead of Illinois under J.B. Pritzker.
Yeah.
So, folks, when we come back, guess what your congressman is paid and for how many days of the year they show up to actually work. you're in for a shock. This is John Rust on The John Rust Show on Freedom 95. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Freedom 95 on Rust on the Radio, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. So for the break, we were talking about how much Congress gets paid to do so little. Guess what their salary is? Technically, it's $174,000 a year. But I know for a fact through office allowances and security detail allowances that it's actually well over $200,000 a year for most that take advantage of every loophole to build their salary. You get fantastic benefits. You can legally insider trade. You get a pension after just 5 years. You can pass bills that funnel dollars directly to a family member. You can approve your own travel with other people's money. You know, these people, I'm sorry, they're scumballs. You know, Nancy Pelosi outperformed Warren Buffett over the last 10 years in the stock market. Her stock portfolio grew by 720%. Warren Buffett, who is, in my opinion, the greatest stock trader that's probably ever lived.
There's none other like him.
His portfolio only grew by 185%. Nancy Pelosi had 4 times the gains.
She could run a pretty lucrative hedge fund if she wanted to.
Well, that's insider information. It's a club.
True.
And it's why it's the Uniparty, and it's why, you know, I have little hope that Congress will actually ban stock trading by members, but they absolutely should.
They should.
You know, I know for a fact that if I'm ever elected to any office, I would never trade individual stocks, never. Because it's just wrong. You know, in my opinion, you know, you should allow people to buy stocks, but it should be in an index fund like, you know, I would like the S&P 500.
Right.
You know, something that is broad and over the general economy, not specific stocks that you have an effect on.
Right. Would blind trusts count as something you would probably ban as well? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know that they're really blind.
Yeah, good point.
Because you shouldn't have access to that information and be trading on it. And so if you're not allowed to trade on it, maybe your wife is.
Yeah.
And that's wrong.
It's a good point.
I think this goes back to the issue of just career politicians in general. I mean, Congress shouldn't be a place where you go to just sit there for 10 years, go on vacation.
And worry about your net worth.
Exactly.
It is an honor to serve in Congress. Instead, we get these parasites who get in there, and, you know, they're like these ticks, you know, that you see on your dog sometimes that have these very large blood sacs on them.
Ugh.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of Jim Banks and all of our Republicans, whenever you see a tick with that big engorged blood sac on it, that's what those people are. Pure and simple.
They leech on and they'll never go.
They're leached on, and they are passing massive government spending that you and our kids will be paying for forever and ever, basically. You know, Thomas Jefferson, that's one of the reasons I quote him a lot, he was actually an economic conservative. He believed in fiscal restraint. He worked diligently to pay down the nation's debt after the American Revolution. And surprisingly, he was on track to eliminate the debt from the American Revolution, but for the War of 1812. We were on track to pay it off completely. You know, so I'm talking about ticks, and I remember my interview with Gary Bradley, we were talking about politics. Poly means many. Ticks means blood-sucking leeches. Politics, well, that's the parasite class.
Good analogy.
Needs the taxpayers, us. You know, the Americans do not need the parasite class. Unfortunately, we get forced to have these people like Banks forced on us. You know, there was no one allowed to run against him. I tried to run against him, and the establishment said, no, you're not part of that uniparty leech class.
And you tried. You did it, gave it your best shot, and they still had other plans, including the 9th District GOP chair, who's in prison, I might add. I believe
the
that's
former 9th District
former
chair.
9th District. Let me correct that.
Yep.
Former 9th District GOP chair Jamie Knoll, former Clark County sheriff, is now in prison for
And
money laundering.
Clark County Republican chairman.
Yikes.
Right. That says everything you need to know about the Republican establishment in Indiana.
I mean, these people get forced on us, and they
Well,
just sit
and
there.
like Banks,
they do
he
nothing.
doesn't even live in the state of Indiana. He lives in Virginia.
True.
That's
You
right.
know, so Virginia really has 3 senators right now.
It does. They have Mark Warner, Tim Kaine, and Jim Banks. And I was also going to add with the Jamie Knoll thing, let's remember Jamie Knoll actually was part of Team Banks, and that post is still on Instagram.
Well, and I focus on today, and what I would be focused on today had I been elected to the United States Senate is getting leadership in the Republican Party that actually wants to work and get the job done. That's not happening. They just go on perpetual vacations. I agree with Kate on Twitter. She says it's time to demand senators remove leader John Thune as Senate leader. When do we decide that enough is enough? Democrats had a slim majority and managed to confirm 14 judges in less than a month. Congress has been sitting on the sidelines, sitting on their hands.
It's amazing. And
and you know what Senator John Thune's Liberty score is?
I'm going to say it's a fail.
It's a big old F.
That's not
51%.
And I would assume that his colleague from South Dakota, Mike Rounds, is about the same.
Well, guess what? Todd Young's higher. He's at 52%. He's 1% higher than John Thune. That's Indiana, folks, that just continue to tax and spend. And by spending, I mean we are facing now, I just read $4 trillion of new government debt this year alone based on this year's budget. $4 trillion of new debt.
Just spiraling out of control.
Thomas Jefferson said, we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. Guess what? Our debt is now $37 trillion. We were on track with Elon Musk and Doge to cut government spending massively. Remember, they found over $1.5 trillion in government waste. And he was shown the exit. He is no longer involved in that. Doge is still working, but it's nowhere near as effective as it was because
he's not there to lead the
this
team.
Is from Robert Barnes. As soon as Elon Musk and Doge wanted to go to the Defense Department and the Federal Reserve, Elon was suddenly out and Doge suddenly cut off. Coincidence? I think
that's not a coincidence.
I am for a lethal military. I am for a military that will kill our enemies without any political correctness. To kill our enemies, period.
Yeah.
If you are a evildoer, to quote George W. Bush, you need to meet your end.
I agree.
Pure and simple. But that doesn't mean the Pentagon should be paying $100,000 for a bag of washers you can get at a hardware store for $10.
Yeah. They could go to a
and
hardware
that's what's
store
going on right now.
Be a lot cheaper if they did it as you suggested for $10.
And this all has massive ramifications for next year's election. Listen to Matt Vance Wool. I'm new to this whole MAGA thing, but I expected the Democrats would try to block Trump at every possible turn. What I did not expect at all was the GOP to block him just as often and sometimes even more.
Yeah.
Truly shocking. You want your blood to boil? The average private sector American has 10 to 14 paid vacation days per year. Members of Congress have 98 to 105 paid vacation days per year.
It's lovely. Isn't that just lovely? And you pointed out that this is massive consequences. What
Paid
they're
for
doing.
by you.
Yes.
And our kids.
And you pointed out the massive consequences that this has for the next election. If they keep this up and they keep being as ineffective as they are, if we've learned anything from history, like 20 years ago, we lost. It was President Bush's second term. We got slaughtered. And here in Indiana, the Democrats targeted numerous different seats. I'm not saying they're going to target Indiana this time, but they will target seats, and they will do whatever they can to win back the House if we keep this up.
Well,
and they'll probably get the Senate if they're really ambitious.
What I can't stand is they're all liars. They all come to Indiana and visit and speak at Lincoln Day dinners how conservative they are, and then they go back to Washington and vote the exact opposite. Exact opposite.
It's almost like they don't want the majority they have. They got the majority, and they're like, oh, no, we don't want it no more.
I think Jim Banks would love to be in the minority because then he can sit there and preen around and act conservative while not actually having to walk the walk. Unfortunately, the Senate today, folks, they're not walking the walk. Well, they're walking the walk. It's on the beach somewhere.
Yeah.
They're not in Washington doing their job. If people can go to prison for lying to Congress, then shouldn't members of Congress go to prison for lying to the people?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good question. Absolutely.
When the Republican majority Senate was seated in January, they immediately sent a resounding FU, I'll use the polite term, to MAGA voters by electing Rhino John Thune as majority leader. To add insult to injury, this is from Steve Ferguson, by the way. To add insult to injury, they voted for Rhino Mitch McConnell for chairman of the Powerful Rules Committee and Rhino Susan Collins to chair the Appropriations Committee. That is how little they think of the voters who gave them the majority in the first place. Am I being too harsh? Well, I'm disappointed in J.D. Vance. What's going on? This is from Donald Russo. I wish the vice president would issue a statement today indicating that he intends to show up on the Senate at the outset of every one of Thune's pro forma sessions and call for a quorum so that we can get the Senate either shut down so that Trump can make recess appointments, which they are blocking right now, by having these pro forma sessions where there's no one there. J.D. Vance could stop it.
Exactly. He's the president of the Senate. He's the presiding officer.
Correct.
And he could do this. So my question is, and again, if he did this, he could be, as people are trying to say, he's the de facto nominee.
He could be a star.
He could be the star and the next nominee, probably the next
president. He could show himself
president.
to be a conservative star by working to get Donald Trump's nominees appointed. Well, this is unprecedented, folks. This is the first time in modern American history that the U.S. Senate, and this is a Republican doing this, has blocked a president from making any recess appointments. President Reagan had 240 recess appointments. George Bush Sr. had 77. Bill Clinton had 139. George W. Bush had 171. Even President Obama had 32. Trump has had 0 in both terms. 0. That is mind-blowing. But it's unfortunately not surprising. That, in a nutshell, tells you everything you need to know about Jim Banks and Todd Young and our Republicans in the Senate. They don't care about letting President Trump do his job. They're there to preen and to preach, but to never act, to never walk the walk.
They need to be walking the walk back home is where they need to be going.
Well, they're on vacation. This is from U.S. Term Limits on Twitter. Congress is on vacation again. They're taking a month off while Americans wait for real change.
I wonder where they're at on vacation. I'm actually legitimately curious.
Probably some island, starts with an E, ends with an N. I don't know. I guess Lindsey Graham and Jim Banks are walking on a beach somewhere right now with a pina colada. I don't know. But term limits would cure both senility and seniority, both terrible legislative diseases. Harry S. Truman. That is it.
I think Truman once said, and I agreed with this, show me somebody who gets rich from being in politics and I'll show you a crook.
This is from Todd Starnes. We gave the Republicans control of the House and the Senate. They said that's what they need to advance President Trump's agenda. They have failed to do so. And now the House and the Senate are actively sabotaging the president's agenda. It's almost as if they want the Democrats to take control in the midterms.
Certainly seems like that.
Well, we just need to get Congress back to work. This is from Thomas Massey. Republicans fled D.C. to protect the Epstein files, just like Democrats fled Texas to protect their districts. Talking about the redistricting plan going on in Texas right now. So, folks, we're out of time right now, but when we come back, we're going to get right back into this on the Epstein files. This is John Rust on the Radio. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial all across beautiful central Indiana, our beautiful fruited plain, as Rush Limbaugh used to say. I miss him so much.
We all miss him.
Someone I think Rush would have really admired today greatly and be talking about a lot is Thomas Massey, District 4 Kentucky congressman. From EpsteinJustice.com. No one has been more committed to bringing forth the truth on the Epstein files than Thomas Massey. He is committed to justice for this. Where have the Republicans been on this? Speaker Mike Johnson on Ghislaine Maxwell's sentence on Meet the Press. If you're asking my opinion, I think 20 years was a pittance. I think she should have had a life sentence at least. I mean, think of all these unspeakable crimes, and as you noted earlier, probably 1,000 victims. and this is again from Speaker Johnson, I mean, it's hard to put into words how evil this was, and she orchestrated it and was a big part of it. At least under criminal sanction, I think it's an unforgivable thing. So Gwen, it's not my decision, but I have great pause about that, as any reasonable person would. And what he was talking about is a possible pardon for Ghislaine Maxwell. That's absolutely wrong.
She does not deserve a pardon. She was just as much a part of it as was Jeffrey Epstein. I would just point out, you pointed out the Epstein justice thing where Thomas Massey's committed. Jim Banks, I would just point out, they say has not committed to releasing the files. In fact, if you look, he's never said anything about the Epstein files. He's pretty silent on it, and has been for some time.
Well, I say heck no to any kind of pardon. Let the justice system take its course. Let laws matter to everyone. You can't just pardon people who may or may not be speaking favorably for you in a court of law at a future date.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what Joseph Biden did.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't abide by President Trump doing the same thing. I'm sorry.
Yeah, pardon shouldn't even be in a discussion point right now.
No.
I mean,
well, this was a horrific crime. She trained underage girls as sex slaves. That's what it was alleged that happened. In my opinion, MAGA should not stand for it. Molesters are granted amnesty.
Exactly. Any congressman, senator, governor, whatever, anyone who's worth anything would immediately come out and say, one, she should not be pardoned. Two, these files need to be released immediately, and we need to figure out who was actually involved in this, and they need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I mean, anybody who's worth anything should be saying something like that. That's why Thomas Massey is one of the only members of Congress who I actually have respect for, because he's the only one who's not just letting this slide under the rug. He's actually trying to shine the light on this.
And if you notice, as soon as certain news stories came up, the Epstein files all of a sudden were not being covered, and I think that's insane, and they need to be covered because this should not be going away.
That's why we're going to keep talking about this issue on this radio show. I am not going to be quiet about that. I'm not going to be quiet about what Americans are earning. Americans are not earning enough to keep up with what inflation is doing. You guys are all much younger.
Yes.
And I hear a lot that, young people don't want to work. Listen to this. In 1980, you could work a 40-hour-a-week job, paid minimum wage, and make enough to cover your annual college tuition here in the state of Indiana on a minimum wage job. Today, you could work 60 hours a week all summer long at $16 an hour, and you won't even get close.
I mean, that's just depressing. I mean, no other way to put it.
Well, I think you have to reward work, and people talk about the work ethic not being high right now. I say baloney. Pay well, and people will absolutely work. I'm going to keep hammering this point over and over because it's very important. Minimum wage in 1971 was $1.60 per hour. That equaled 1.82 ounces of gold on a 40-hour work week, when the dollar was backed by gold, when we had a hard currency. That is the today equivalent of $150 per hour. It's incredible. Of course, people would work very hard for $150 an hour at a part-time job.
I think anybody would.
That's actual hard math, and I know it sounds incredible. People should absolutely be paid more than what they are doing, but that does not mean the government should be mandating minimum wages. No, I say let the free market decide that, and we're not letting the free market decide that because of what the government is doing, because people like Jim Banks are continuing to add massive government debt. We have inflation and we have a weakening dollar because of those actions by Jim Banks, pure and simple.
Huh?
This is from the Kobaisi letter. This is concerning. On Twitter, the Kobaisi letter. Wage growth for the lowest paid workers in the U.S. slowed to only 3.7% year over year in June, the lowest in 7 years. That's more than a 50% drop from the plus 7.5% peak seen in 2022. These are workers currently earning less than $806 a week. Meanwhile, the top earners, those making over $1,887 a week, saw wages rise by 4.7% year over year. In 1978, again, this is very important, a student could earn enough from a full-time summer job to pay a year's college tuition at a public university. I did it myself in 1985 at IU. A summer's work yielded about $1,378, easily covering the average annual tuition and required fees of $688. My answer to all this is government got involved. If we removed government from student loans, college would be cheaper. If we removed government from healthcare would be cheaper. If we removed government from housing costs would be cheaper. Remember, folks, what I talked about on the postage stamps. We're up to 78 cents for a first-class stamp now. In 1952, they were 3 cents for a first-class stamp. Adjusted for inflation, that should still be 36 cents today, but the post office is at 78 cents. We're well over twice what the rate of inflation has been in that time for a government-ran post office. Trump had this to say on all this. He says, Trump on undocumented farm workers. People that live in the inner city are not doing that work. They tried, we tried, everyone tried. They don't do it. These people do it naturally, referring to illegal immigrants. Naturally, they don't get a bad back because if they get a bad back, they die. I say, no, let's not have a slave class come into the United States to do the jobs American workers don't want to do. I say, pay the jobs accordingly so that you will actually do them. I am a farmer, and this just totally offends me. I did back-breaking work when I was young. I make no apologies for that. And yes, I was only earning minimum wage, but back then that was enough to pay my way through college. I'm proud of that. Why should we not pay people a wage that means something? But again, it's the market that has to decide that, and the market is not going to pay a fair wage for young people working today if you have illegal immigrants taking all the jobs and doing them for a fraction of what they should be paid for. That's the nut of this issue, pure and simple. We have to have the free market at work, and we don't have the free market at work because that is not the free market, just bringing in slave labor to drive wages down. It's absolutely wrong. I have a strong work ethic. I believe in hard work, but I also believe it should absolutely be paid well, very well.
Absolutely.
Laissez-faire economics is the way to go. 100%.
It is.
Quote-unquote conservative Senator Josh Hawley plans to introduce legislation to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour.
I'm pretty sure that is a Democratic talking point that's been
Exactly.
used quite a bit. So I have no idea what he is even thinking by proposing that. What is he trying? Is that just to buy votes?
Well, my answer is the government, if they quit spending more than they're bringing in and they paid down the debt, our dollars would be worth more and they would not have to do any wage adjustment because, again, the free market would take care of it. Our dollars would be worth something again. Instead of just constantly devaluing the dollar like, Jim Banks and Todd Young and every member of the Indiana Republican establishment voted for. You can't have massive debt and have a strong dollar. It just does not equate. And we talked about this in last week's show, how the dollar is losing value so fast. College tuition, it's up 701% over the last 40 years. Overall inflation was only 199%. Remember what I said about the postage stamp? When the government got involved in student loans, that just opened a tidal wave of massive spending by these universities who were getting all this free and easy money that you have to work for to pay, and you will have to pay back someday. Well, you want to work and earn an honorable wage, which you're entitled to and should have. That should be the American way, so you can afford a home. Today that's a dream. It's or a fantasy. Look at what's happening to the purchasing power of the U.S. consumer dollars. It is down 53% just since 1995. The dollar has lost over half its value. Folks, that's third world talk. That's unfortunately, I can't believe I'm talking about this. In my lifetime, how the American dollar has become a third world currency because of career politicians in Washington who keep voting for massive new government debt.
Ronald Reagan had a great quote on this. It was something like, the most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Again, inflation isn't when prices go up. Inflation is when the money supply increases faster than production of goods and services. Rising prices are a symptom of inflation, not the cause. This distinction matters because it reveals the true culprit: government money printing. It's not corporate greed, it's people in Washington continually spending money that we don't have. They are devaluing your currency in your pocket today less and less every day. The assets haven't gone up in value. The money you measure them against has gone down. Listen to this, folks. You needed $124 in 2025 to have the same purchasing power of $100 in 2020. That was only 5 years ago. Inflation is theft that compounds year over year until it's too late. So, folks, we're out of time for this segment, but when we come back, I want to get into BlackRock buying up all the homes in the United States. Home ownership is fast becoming only a dream in the United States. Find out who BlackRock donates to and how many homes they own now. When we come back on Rust on the Radio, the John Rust Show on Freedom 95. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the John Rust Show on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. I am your friend and farmer from Seymour, Indiana, and we are talking about conservatism and how conservatism has left the state of Indiana, unfortunately. I am a massive proponent of Margaret Thatcher and her philosophy. Listen to this. Margaret Thatcher: every family should have the right to spend their money after tax as they wish, and not as the government dictates. Let us extend choice and extend the will to choose and the chance to choose. It's all about individual freedom. That's being taken away by guess who? BlackRock. Did you know BlackRock owns 1.5 million single-family homes in the United States? That is more than a real estate investment. That is about change. That is about societal change. It's what, remember the quote from the World Economic Forum?
Klaus Schwab: you will own nothing and be happy.
BlackRock owns controlling shares in the banks who approve mortgages, appraisal companies that value the homes, title companies, and who track home ownership. Why do you think these prices keep skyrocketing? You're being priced out, and it's by BlackRock. Listen to this. These construction companies that build the homes, guess who owns them?
BlackRock.
Right. Guess who they donate to? Jim Banks and Todd Young have both been funded by BlackRock. That says everything right there. And this is from True North on Twitter. On top of BlackRock owning all that real estate, they own the local, state, and federal politicians who control legislation affecting home ownership via quote-unquote clean donations and dark money. So we know about the clean donations to Banks and to Young. We don't know about the dark, what's really going on behind the scenes. There's going to be an interesting show on that I'm actually preparing for in the future that will be eye-opening. So BlackRock, through all these channels, decides who gets to own a home and doesn't. BlackRock prevents individuals and other companies from competing against them to purchase homes through this process. They even are backing higher property taxes to force people to sell existing homes because they know they can buy them. And many communities are offering property tax abatements to BlackRock to establish so-called low-income housing. Cue Klaus Schwab.
You will own nothing and the New World Order, you will own nothing and be happy.
Well, why did BlackRock, a corporation with $10 trillion in assets, get $500 billion of U.S. taxpayer money in one of the COVID bills? That's from the Red Pill Bot on Twitter. That's what's going on, folks. How can you compete against that?
You can't.
Jim Banks and Todd Young, they all voted for that.
Yeah. You can't compete.
And
you don't.
Of course,
stand a
they
chance.
get donations from them. Of course, they're going to give money back. That's what happens here in the IEDC in the state of Indiana.
That's true.
It's exactly the same. Well, then on property taxes, they all scream, oh, if you cut property taxes, you'll have no fire service and no schools. Baloney.
No.
You know,
Exactly.
Remember, and this is from Hoosiers Against Liberal Theocracy.
I love that account.
On Twitter, emergency services will immediately crumble if we reduce property taxes, but at least we will still get glow-in-the-dark bike trails. This is from the Indy Department of Public Works. Indy just got brighter. Literally, the new $7.2 million stretch of Pogues Run Trail glows in the dark and runs through Spades Park in Brookside. It won a 2025 ACEC Merit Award and is perfect for a walk, run, or ride any time of day.
I doubt it's even that bright. And besides, you're not. No, I know it's that. I doubt the glowing is even bright. And besides, who's going to want to go out in Indianapolis at 3 a.m. when you've got all the other stuff that goes on?
So we have the fourth
time?
highest gasoline tax in the country. They're bringing tolls to every mile of Indiana interstates now, apparently, so that we can have glow-in-the-dark bike trails. You know, we're a red state. Spending $7.2 million on a glow-in-the-dark bike path.
My question is, who asked for it? I don't think anyone did.
That's what I'm
None of
saying.
us asked for
I
it.
guarantee if you took like a survey of people who supported it and who didn't, I guarantee you'd have more like opposement to
Now
it.
let's say if there was a reason, let's say in a smaller town like maybe Columbus, for example. I'm just throwing out a name. Or you go to or somewhere else, Nashville in Brown County, Indiana. You go there, maybe like let's say the community has enough money and they're like, hey, we want to fundraise for it. Let's say it's like fundraising by the community and they want something like that. And not only that, I should also point out that park is not even open at 3 a.m. So probably
So
for the
why is it
best.
glowing in the dark?
That's my question.
Okay, folks. You know, all this ties into government spending in the state of Indiana and how local governments are swimming in money. If we can afford a $7.2 million glow-in-the-dark bike trail, we're being taxed too much. I'm sorry. Pure and simple. I'm not sorry.
You know, there's a big scandal at my school. They built a new access road that went behind the school and hit another highway. Well, they put a brand spanking new sign for the school right next to the road, and that ticked off a lot of the residents to the point where every single school board member up for re-election that year lost because so many residents were so ticked off that they used our tax dollars for just a sign, and everybody was like, nobody asked for it, nobody wanted it, it's a waste of money.
Well,
That
and-
shows you what happens when a community comes together.
Exactly.
And, well, it happened in Jackson County, my hometown, Seymour. They spent nearly $1 million for a welcome to Seymour sign. $1 million.
They could have just
wild.
asked an individual
I
to do
would have
it.
happily carved a sign much cheaper than that myself.
That's what I was about to say. You could have made a sign much cheaper for.
$1 million.
They could have contracted, I'm sure, but that's a whole other story.
Folks, state government, county government, local government, they are swimming in money. Don't believe otherwise. If they can afford $1 million welcome signs, glow-in-the-dark trails,
Horrible new Indiana welcome signs.
we don't need tolls on the interstates our gasoline taxes have already paid for. And speaking on property tax, this is from the American Citizen on Twitter. The fact that you can own your own land, build your home, and pay off your loan, but still lose it to property taxes is criminal. It's what Margaret Thatcher says. Freedom of choice is the essence of a free society, and that includes the right to choose how you spend your earnings. Every time government takes a bigger slice of your pay packet, it is taking a bigger slice of your freedom. Governor Ron DeSantis, that's why I strongly support him. Listen to this. Home ownership means you should own it free and clear of the government. But not in Indiana. We're getting more and more massive tax increases on our property.
Exactly. Like I've got a property down in Switzerland County that pays yearly $1,300 a year just for the property. It's like that's not mine. That's so evidently I'm paying rent to the government at that point.
You're paying rent to the government. There is a caveat to this, and we got to be careful that we don't give BlackRock tax-free status on their homes. The property tax elimination Ron DeSantis is talking about applies to the primary homes of Florida residents, not investors. That is key.
That's
Exactly.
a key distinction.
Well, this is where I'm at philosophically on this. Why is there a tobacco tax? So that people smoke less. Why is there a property tax? The answer there, folks, is so that you have less and less chance of holding on to your property so that BlackRock can buy it. That is sad to say. I am so crestfallen over that. I'm so disappointed in that.
It's literally the government working against us.
We're a red state. We should not have property tax on people's homes. Pure and simple. Your home is your castle. You shouldn't be paying rent to the government to live in your home. Pure and simple.
Exactly.
So, folks, we're out of time, but I want to thank you so much for listening. I'm going to close this program with my father's favorite Bible verse, Psalm 118, verse 24. This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Folks, thank you so much. Again, next week's show is all about how Indiana bans 81% of Hoosiers from running for political office. So stay tuned for that next week on The John Rush Show on Freedom 95. I'll see you all again next week on the radio.